Chapter 47, Flying Squirrels. Why, Flora wondered, did everything become silent when Ulysses flew? It had been the same in the giant donut, at least until everyone started screaming. It was as if some small piece descended. The world became dreamy, beautiful, slow. Flora looked around her. She smiled. The sun was shining into the kitchen, illuminating everything. Ulysses's whiskers, the typewriter keys, her father's upturned and smiling face, and her mother's astonished and disbelieving one. Even William Spiver was illuminated, his white hair glowing like a wild halo. "What is it?" said William Spiver. "What's going on?" Flora's father laughed. "Do you see, Phyllis? Do you? Anything can happen." Ulysses floated above them. He zoomed down to the ground and then went shooting back up to the ceiling. He looked behind him and performed a lazy mid-air backflip. "For the love of Pete," said Flora's mother in a strange and wooden voice. Someone tell me something," said William Spiver. Ulysses dived down again. He flew past William Spiver's right ear. "Ack!" said William Spiver. "What was that?" "The squirrel," said Flora's mother in her strange new voice. "He is flying." She stood up suddenly. "Right," she said. "Okay. I have to go upstairs and take a nap." Which was an odd thing for her to say because Flora's mother was not, in any way, a napper. In fact, she was an anti-napper. She didn't believe in naps at all. She often said they were a big fat waste of time. "Yes, a little nap. That is what I need." Flora's mother walked out of the kitchen and closed the door behind her. Ulysses landed on the table next to the typewriter. "It's not that shocking," said William Spiver. "There are flying squirrels, you know. They exist. In fact, there are some theories that posit that all squirrels are descended from the flying squirrel. In any case, flying squirrels themselves are a documented fact." Ulysses looked at William Spiver and then over at Flora. He reached out a paw and hit a key on the typewriter. The single clack echoed through the kitchen. "How about flying squirrels who type?" said Flora. "Not as well documented," admitted William Spiver. Ulysses hit another key, and then another. "Holy bagumba," said Flora's father. "He flies, he vanquishes cats, and he types." "He's a superhero," said Flora. "It's amazing," said her father. "It's wonderful, but I think I better go have a quick word with your mother about the whole, situation." Chapter 48, Banished. Clack, clack, clack. Flora stood silently. William Spiver stood silently. The squirrel typed. "Flora Belle," said William Spiver. "Uh-huh," said Flora. I wanted to make sure you were still here." "Where else would I be?" "Well, I don't know. You did say that you were moving out." "My mother wants me to leave," said Flora. "I don't know if that's exactly what she meant," said William Spiver. "I think she was surprised, and perhaps her feelings were hurt. She certainly didn't express herself very well. Shocking, really, that a romance novelist could be so inept at the language of the heart." Clack, clack, Click. Ulysses had a look of deep and supreme satisfaction on his face. "She said it would be easier without me," said Flora. "Yes, well," said William Spiver. He pushed his glasses back up on his nose. He pulled out a chair and sat down again at the kitchen table. He sighed a deep sigh. "My lips are numb," said Flora. "I know that feeling," said William Spiver. "Having suffered through several traumatic episodes myself, I am very familiar with the bodily manifestations of grief." "What happened to you?" asked Flora. "I was banished." Banished. It was a word that Flora could feel in the pit of her stomach. A small, cold stone of a word. Why were you banished? "I think the more relevant question would be, who banished me?" "Okay," said Flora. "Who banished you?" "My mother," said William Spiver. Flora felt another stone fall to the bottom of her stomach. "Why?" she said. "There was an unfortunate incident involving my mother's new husband, a man who is not my father, a man who bears the idiotic appellation Tyrone." "Where's your father?" said Flora. "He died." Oh. One more stone sank to the bottom of Flora's stomach. "My father, my real father, was a man of great humanity and intelligence," said William Spiver. "Also, he had delicate feet. Very, very tiny feet. I, too, am small of foot." Flora looked at William Spiver's feet. They did seem extremely small. "Not that that is particularly relevant information. In any case, my father was a man who could play the piano wonderfully well. He had an in-depth knowledge of astronomy. He liked to consider the stars. His name was William. But he's dead. And now my mother is married to a man named Tyrone, who does not have delicate feet, and who is supremely unaware that there are stars in the sky. The mysteries of the universe mean nothing to him. He sold my father's piano. He is a man who refuses to call me William. Instead, this man refers to me as Billy. My name, as you know, is not now, nor has it ever been, nor will it ever be, Billy. I took issue with being so addressed. I repeatedly took issue, and after repeatedly taking issue and repeatedly being ignored, one thing led to another, and some irrevocable acts occurred, and thus I was banished." "What thing led to another thing?" said Flora. "What irrevocable acts occurred?" "It's complicated," said William Spiver. "I don't want to talk about it right now. But as long as we are asking each other questions of an emotionally fraught nature, why did you say that your mother wanted a lamp for a daughter?" "It's complicated," said Flora. "I'm certain that it is, and I empathize." There was another long silence, punctuated by the clacking of typewriter keys. "The squirrel is working on another poem, I suppose," said William Spiver. "I guess," said Flora. "It sounds like a long one, epic in nature. What in the world would a Squirrel have to write about at such length?" "A lot happened today," said Flora. It was late afternoon. The shadows of the elm and the maple in the backyard entered the kitchen and flung themselves in purple lines across the floor. Flora would miss those shadows when she moved away. She would miss the trees. She supposed she would even miss William Spiver. And then, almost as if he were reading her mind, William Spiver said, "I meant what I said. I'm here because I was looking for you. I missed you." Flora's heart, the lonely, many-armed squid of it, flipped and flailed inside of her. She opened her mouth to say that it didn't matter. Not really, not now. But as usual, what she intended to say to William Spiver and what she said were two different things. The sentence Flora intended to say was, "It doesn't matter." The sentence she said was, "Have you ever heard of a place called Blundermesson?" "Pardon me," said William Spiver. He held up his right hand. I don't mean to alarm you, but do you smell smoke?" Flora sniffed. She did smell smoke. Now there was going to be a fire on top of everything else? For the love of Pete. Chapter 49. Good news, Florabelle. Flora's mother and father entered the kitchen together. Her mother had a cigarette in her mouth. Her mother was smoking. Her father had his arm around her mother's shoulder. This was almost as alarming as seeing her mother smoke. Her mother and father never touched any more. "Good news, Florabelle," said her father. "Really?" said Flora. She never believed it when someone said there was good news. In her experience, when there was good news, people just said what the good news was. If there was bad news that they wanted you to believe was good news, then they said, "Good news." And if there was really bad news, they said, "Good news, Florabelle." Your mother thinks that it would be wonderful to have the squirrels stay here, said her father. "What?" said Flora. "Here? With her? And where am I supposed to stay?" "Here," said her father, "with your mother. You, your mother, and the squirrel. That's what your mother would like." Flora looked at her mother. "Mom," she said. "I would be honored," said her mother, and she took a long drag on her cigarette, her hand trembling. "Why are you smoking?" said Flora. "I thought you stopped smoking." "It seemed like the wrong time to stop," said her mother. She squinted. "I am under a lot of pressure right now. Speaking of which, I see that the squirrel is typing on my typewriter, where I write." "He writes poetry," said William Spiver, "not fiction." "Let's just have a look-see," said Flora's mother. She walked over to the typewriter and stood looking down at Ulysses and at the words on the page. "Let's see what kind of poetry a squirrel types." Her voice sounded funny still, tinny, and far away, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a dark well. Actually, what she sounded like was a robot, someone pretending to be a human and doing a lousy job of it. Flora felt a flicker of fear. "Let me just light another cigarette here," said her mother in her robot voice. She lit a new cigarette from the tip of the old one, which was, of course, chain smoking and dangerous behavior at the best of times. And this obviously was not the best of times. Her mother inhaled deeply on the cigarette. She exhaled. She said, "Shall I read the squirrel poetry aloud?" Chapter 50. An incomplete list. Actually, it wasn't poetry. Not yet. So far, it was just a list of words that he wanted to turn into a poem. The first word on the list was jelly. Jelly was followed by giant donut, which was in turn followed by sprinkle. The list continued on with these words: Rita, sunny side up, Pascal, giant squid, little shepherdess, vanquished, capacious, quark, universe expanding, blunder me sen, banished. The list ended with the words of Dr. Meacham's goodbye. I promise to always turn back toward you. The words were good words, Ulysses felt, maybe even great words, but the list was very incomplete. He was just getting started. The words needed to be arranged, fussed with, put in the order of his heart. All of this is to say that when Flora's mother read the list out loud, it didn't sound terribly impressive. Gosh, that's some swell poetry, said George Buckman.
Not really, said William Spiver. There's no point in lying to him, even if he is a squirrel. It's actually pretty lousy poetry. But I do like the last part, the part about turning back. That has some emotional heft to it.
Well, I think it is just great, said Flora's mother, and I'm glad to welcome another writer into the family. She patted Ulysses on the head. Too forcefully, he felt. The pat approached violence. We are going to be one happy little family, said Flora's mother. She gave Ulysses another whack disguised as a pat. Really? Said Flora. Oh, yes, said Flora's mother. There was a knock at the back door. Yoo-hoo! Someone called out. Tootie, thought Ulysses. Tootie, thought Flora. Mrs. Tickum, said Flora's mother, do come in. We were just reading some words that the squirrel typed. Ha, ha. We were reading some squirrel poetry. William, said Tootie, I've been calling and calling you.
I didn't hear you.
Well, I must admit that I wasn't calling very loudly, said Tootie. What did Ulysses type? Flora's mother read the list of words again. Tootie put her hand over her heart and said, Oh, those last lines are beautiful, heartbreaking.
Those last lines are the only bit of coherence in the whole thing, said William Spiver.
I've been inspired by Ulysses to write a little poetry of my own, said Tootie. Ulysses felt himself puff up. He had inspired Tootie. He turned and sniffed his tail. I'd like to read your poetry, Tootie, said Flora. Well, we should have a poetry reading at some point. I'm sure Ulysses would enjoy that. The squirrel nodded. Yes, yes, he would enjoy that. He would also enjoy a bite to eat. Dr. Meacham's jelly sandwiches had been wonderful, but that was a long time ago. He would like to eat, and he would like for Tootie to read poetry to him, and he would like to work on his own poem. Also, he would like for Flora's mother to quit pounding him on the head, which she was doing again now. William, said Tootie, your mother called for you.
Did she?
Said William Spiver. His voice was squeaky with hope.
Really? Did she ask for me to come home?
Unfortunately not, said Tootie, but it's dinner time. Come home with me and eat something. Home, thought Ulysses. That's a good word. And dinner is a good word too. He turned back to the typewriter. He searched for the H.